Okay, welcome back to Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 90, part 2, This Week in Macro. This week in macro, what's happening in the EU, what's happening in Japan, and what that means for China and America, the two competing trade war superpowers at the moment. We're going to be covering everything that happened this week in macro and mainly focusing on those two themes as well. If you didn't watch part 1, where I covered this week in Bitcoin and all of the different regulations that are happening in the Bitcoin crypto CBDC market that are leading to certain solutions that we'll be covering this week in macro, then make sure you go back and watch that. It will be available, or you can just jump straight in to part 2. Now, you'll know that if you've a long-term listener or Bitcoin Hard Talk, that there is the Proof of Weapons network that has currently BlackRock as its fictitious CEO. If you don't know what, and by the way, I say CEO because it's the most important actor. It moves based upon the flow of funds, who has the power in the Proof of Weapons network. But if you haven't watched my blog on the Proof of Weapons network, I got a little summary that I gave there, an AI summary, or you can watch the full video where I give a full explanation. But I don't want to go through it in every single video. But essentially, it is a stateless entity that consists of the banksters, the corporations, the technical industrial complex, the military industrial complex, the financial industrial complex, the intelligence agencies, and their control over government through various blackmail operations and criminal networks in order to create these black op operations and manage the different countries like a portfolio, particularly Western countries like America, European Union, colonies like Israel, the UK, and various other colonies of the previous UK empire as well. And so the European Union is currently being vassalized into the Proof of Weapons network. What that means is that the European Union and the European Central Bank don't use money for Europeans. They don't use policy for Europeans. They use it for the companies that profit from this vassalization. And essentially, a country just becomes a tool for corporate profits for the Proof of Weapons network. You become a tool of the portfolio. And so you get destabilization campaigns that work against the European people. You have uni-party, different operations like open borders and mass deportations that lead to destabilization campaigns, that they can use media in order to fuel racial tensions, religious tensions, that can lead to surveillance, that can lead to war progressions. They can use organizations like NATO in order to increase weapon sales, and they can use organizations like USAID to take over BBC funding in order to push out a narrative that leads to you justifying why money's not being spent on the people, but is going to Ukraine to push the profits of Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, so that then US corporations like Tesla that need rare earth minerals get to benefit from having the components of their batteries and various other things by funding militia groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, M23, M13, to engage in covert wars, and all of the apparatus that is set up around that. EU is going through a major destabilization campaign, and it has been, and it particularly accumulated in covert regime change in Ukraine, installing a puppet government for the military industrial complex, and then antagonizing Russia through NATO expansion, so you could vassalize the land over to Russia. And BlackRock might be able to get some of those components for its portfolio companies. The latest thing that the EU is doing is it's decided in its infinite wisdom for the Proof of Weapons network that the EU has approved a new round of sanctions, a lower oil price cap. This is the 18th round of Russian oil sanctions. None of them worked. But yet they think that this oil price cap is going to fool enough people into thinking that they're sanctioning in order to stop Russia while they're profiting from the whole war and everything that happens as well. So let's move into common sense corner and analyze this a little bit more. Firstly, what does a price cap on oil do? It doesn't affect Russia. it does affect the partners like EU. So when EU needs to purchase this oil, and it essentially, it's going to harm the European Union more than it's going to actually harm Russia. So let's look at some of this. We've had 17 rounds of sanctions that have failed. And sanctions essentially lower oil prices for who? They lower oil prices for the ones that are buying from Russia, which is China and India. And India is then selling it more expensively because it's got a cap from these sanctions to the European Union. And this just raises the price of oil for Europeans, which creates more revenue for Russia. What else does it impact? So we're told there is currently an artificial intelligence race, which there absolutely is. But Keir Starmer from the UK is saying they want to be a vital part of the AI race. And if you want to be a vital part of the AI race, you need cheap electricity, which requires cheap gas, which was switched off when they sanctioned Russia and the CIA blew up Nord Stream pipeline as part of the proof of weapons network campaign to destroy Germany's manufacturing base. And yet some EU members basically have the world's highest rates of electricity due to costly gas because of these sanctions. So this is strategically weakening the economy. And then private equity firms at BlackRock get to purchase up all those assets. Foreign nations get to purchase assets in distress, like Thames Water in the UK, and they get to buy water assets in distress. If Russian oil production is cut in half as a result of these price caps, then the European economies will collapse because they need to work with Russia. And this was a campaign to weaken it. And that's how you know that our leaders and the European Union do not work for the Europeans. They work for the corporations, and we've all been vassalized into the proof of weapons network, which is represented by the BlackRock portfolio companies now. And so what does Trump do in reaction? Trump says, oh, right, now we've done that humiliation ritual where Zelensky was kind of moving over to Europe. We get to pretend we're the peacekeepers. And I send JD Vance over to Europe in order to do a humiliation ritual. And then suddenly you all increase with Zelensky your NATO budget to 5% so that the euro dollar can be pumped and spend all that money back into American corporations via all the corruption that happens in between, so that you create more inflation in Europe, and you get to strengthen the euro relative to the dollar as these tariff policies are being negotiated. Trump basically says, right, Putin's a bad guy. He's no longer the person of peace. Every time we want peace, they bomb more. So we need to send more weapons, and we need to print more GDP, and we need to have some fake growth from the big, beautiful bill. And we're going to get NATO to pay for it so that we can have a currency play as well. So Trump has come out and said he's now going to impose severe sanctions on Russia if there is no war deal made within 50 days. We've already seen all the sanctions. This is what led to the creation of BRICS, that led to the de-dollarization, that led to all the networks so that they could trade with each other, that ended up empowering China and partnering with Russia and Iran, where we ended up with this power struggle that led to the installation of Trump in the first place, so that we could the world's order could be reset through tariff policies, which only pushes people closer to China and BRICS due to the strategic alliances and the wars and everything that's happened that we cover in the geopolitical section. So what have we seen as a result of these tariffs? Well, many Chinese factories are now simply moving to Vietnam. And Vietnam is negotiating their tariff policy. And so you are pumping Vietnamese economies, the large corporations. The ones that can't afford the tariffs, they're going bankrupt, And essentially, the large multinational corporations being done a favor by the Trump administration through these tariff policies for the proof of weapons network that has a very diverse portfolio that can now strategically acquire all of the bankrupt companies and consolidate them, just like happened in COVID with a different flavor. So now Vietnam released the highest export data it has ever had as a result of this. So you can see what's actually happening as well. There will always be ways around this because the dollar doesn't dominate anymore and we're in a multipolar world order. So it strengthens a multipolar portfolio, as we've covered as well. So companies will keep finding workarounds because they don't work anymore. And this is driving the adoption for BRICS, which is why $1 trillion have been traded amongst BRICS countries. And now they've all been forming partnership between the ASEAN countries, the BRICS countries, and the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, GCC, ASEAN, BRICS, all trading with each other as a result of these tariff policies. So Trump is basically also this week implemented high tariffs on Brazil that the US is basically in a surplus with. So US is in a surplus with Brazil and implemented high tariffs and enters into some kind of theater with BRICS and Brazil and lots of things going back and forth, even though they're in a surplus. Make this make sense. At the same time, he's making enemies with his most important trading partners, more important than China, which is Canada and Mexico, and then also engaging in an EU vassalization campaign by having tariffs on, tariffs off. I think they went from 50%. Now they're going to be between 15 and 20%. But all of that has done is pushed all of these regions further east rather than further west. But obviously, they will work as a block because they're being vassalized. But the corporations that they're being vassalized into are all multinational corporations that have no America first, no EU first, no UK first, and install puppet governments to serve their agenda. That is why nothing is working, because these Western countries are being vassalized into the proof of work network, because the financial industrial complex securitized and financialized everything. And now the assets are controlled not in the interest of the people. And so this is that globalization movement. And what else are we seeing? So as we enter into these trade doors, we're seeing that the global corporations like Nvidia, the second largest asset in the world that has a $4.2 trillion market cap, is now suddenly, because they're global in nature, they're able to export their Nvidia chips to China. And so this is leading to being able to support trade despite the fact that it's meant to be anti-trade. Why? Because the proof of weapons network wants their Nvidia stock to go up, and it went up to a $4.2 trillion market cap because it went up $170 overnight just based upon a backdoor negotiation that Trump is negotiating for the proof of weapons network and for Nvidia that led to the announcement that H20 chip cells are able to go to China and they're able to resume despite any of this quote unquote trade war that's resetting the world order. And so they've also rolled out basically a fully compliant GPU, which is graphics power for the China Communist Party. And so they are trading with the CCP because the proof of weapons network can circumvent all this. This just simply gives more power to those large corporations. That is what and that is why Trump is doing everything that he was installed to do for his backers. And so Trump is being basically a fantastic job for hyper accelerating BRICS, the proof of weapons network, and BlackRock. And we got a new tariff this week, which was a 93.5% tariff on battery components from China. Now, this has a big impact on Tesla, Ford, General Motors, Lucia, and some of the prices on these different components. It pushes the price of the raw minerals like lithium and cobalt and graphite that are all mined globally, which increases the profits of these globally mined products. And then America needs to pay more for them because they don't process them. They're mainly processed in China. And then you have these higher prices, even though you have to also pay the import tax as you import them. Now, if those components could all be made in America, then fine. But during this destabilization phase, that's going to be an inflation. It's a tariff on the American people. It's an additional tax as a result, leading to a weakening of the dollar, as we've been covering, which is leading to the cost of borrowing increasing, which is leading to this type of destabilization campaigns in the US between the Federal Reserve from the Proof of Weapons Network and the Trump administration, which is going around in this merry-go-round of destabilization, distraction, and resetting the world order into this multipolar world order, while everyone can profit from the volatility and pumping the shit out of those share prices for those that own assets, as well as neutral assets like gold and Bitcoin as well. So tariff on components are basically made with these materials and drive up global prices. So this is inflationary pressure. We haven't seen the inflationary impact of these tariffs yet, because the next round of deadlines come in the 1st of August. Then there'll be a lag. Then there'll be people trying to beat those deadlines based upon the speculation of what they're doing next. But in the end, the companies that need these batteries, i.e. electric vehicle cars, normal cars, storage units, solar batteries, all of these different things, they can only go up in prices. And this is more a weakening of the dollar. And where are you actually going to build these things while you have a short-term build of your manufacturing base? It's going to be done on AI and robotics, which will take out those jobs eventually, which is why no matter what, you need to focus on making yourself great again, because I'm not sure how this all goes. Well, I'm pretty sure how it goes, and we'll keep sharing the journey in This Week in Macro, This Week in Bitcoin, and This Week in Geopolitics. But let's look into some of the numbers. Okay, so DXY is a basket of currencies. Mainly the euro is the largest component against the dollar. As long as that is going down below $100, it had a little rally up and it is now weakening again. And so the trend since Liberation Day is a downward trend in the dollar. It's now at 98.22 cents after this little rebound that we had. And it's been a low of below $97. We also had announcements and reports that the New York Times said that Trump is going to be sends a letter to the Fed chair, Powell, in order to try and say, you're fired or please retire. Again, there's this public argument, and they've been priming this ability to have essentially the next federal chairperson, the so-called shadow chair, when Powell has to leave in May 2026, but to render Powell useless in that time by having it, knowing that he's leaving and what will come next by Trump installing his type of person that's going to essentially build a perception that they're going to push rates right down, the short-term rates. And so what is this all doing? It basically means that the long-term rates to lend to the US government, the 10-year treasury, it is now broken and is about to break the 4.5. It keeps going there. So that means the US government debt and the 10 trillion that needs to be refinanced, that is currently at an average of 3.3%. It can only be, the cheapest way to refinance it is by doing a bit of a short-term Ponzi by getting short-term rates down, but the long-term rates are going up. So you can't borrow, or you can borrow at the long-term rates, but you have to pay a much, much higher yield on that. And the yield on the 30-year rates is already broken above 5%. It sometimes fluctuates a little bit, but every time we get one of these destabilization campaigns, it tends to follow with a weakening of the dollar and an increasing of the rate to borrow. because the plan, as we've covered, is this whole fiscal stimulus and refinancing it with short-term debt. So if Trump thought that bonds were basically high after Liberation Day, which liberated the world from the dollar, and he had to capitulate from that strategy because the bond yields, the long-term yields, really went up and it was in real distress. They've since corrected a bit since. Wait until he sees what basically comes if he successfully gets Powell to resign or is fired. It would be a destabilization campaign that most people believe would send the long-term rates soaring and strategically weaken the dollar as well. And so the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, came out this week and reportedly said that he's considered resigning. I'm not sure to believe that. I'm not sure. I don't think it's actually going to happen. But the shadow chair of the Fed can be announced, and they can do that strategy as well. So we'll see what happens in that destabilization campaign. Lots of volatility, lots of profit for the proof of weapon network and the financial industrial complex as well. And remember, this is the same time, if you watch part one, that Bitcoin is rising and continually reaching new all-time highs, while treasury yields are rising and essentially going up as the US dollar is falling, and gold prices are generally rising as well, even though they've had a little bit of a correction. So what is the answer? Why is that all happening? It's because everything is about US deficit spending is out of control and nobody can be the person that controls it. That's why Elon Musk strategically decided that he would capture for the proof of weapons network, I believe, some power plays that I'll be going through in this week in macro. I covered a little bit about my speculation on this power struggle between the technical industrial complex, financial industrial complex, and military industrial complex, those parts of the proof of weapons network. But essentially, looking at the numbers that just came out, last year, the US run, last month, a $70 billion deficit in June. There was actually better figures, so there is some good news. There was actually this year, there was a $27 billion surplus, but that was due to front running of tariffs that brought in the additional revenue and the additional growth. So we got to wait for this to roll out till we'll actually know. But the Treasury actually has its projections. Already this year, the US Treasury is running a $1.3 trillion deficit. And that is based upon year to date to July or whatever the date is today. The estimate is that by the end of the year, it's going to be $1.88 trillion deficit by the end of the year, if we believe their projections. And so $1.8 trillion is what they're estimating will happen. Big Beautiful Bill allowed for $3.3 trillion with a $5 trillion cap over the next 10 years as well. So what was that compared to last year? If we're doing 1.8 trillion this year, last year it was 1.2 trillion. So the deficit is up from Bidenomics. Trumponomics is more aggressive. Bidenomics. And the money's going to the war machine, as we covered in previous aspects, and the surveillance state and various other things as well. Tax cuts that essentially took away from those that were on Medicaid and handed over to corporate tax cuts, which are meant to be creating jobs, and the job figures are strong. Growth is strong when measured by GDP and measured by the stock market, but that is wealth transfer from those that don't own assets to those that do own assets. And that's the issue. That's what's causing the civil unrest right now. That's what's causing the depression. That's what's causing the boomer generational divide and all the things that are happening right now. But this year already, this deficit's getting worse, while the GDP has fallen as well. So Trump's tariffs revenues are basically hitting record highs. And so Elon Musk decided to strategically capitalize on that. And I'll be covering a bit more on that as well. But so far, tariffs are only generating $100 billion so far this year. I think it's going to be approximately $300 billion. Now, that is a large increase. And I expect it to go up because I think the tariffs are real. These aren't negotiation tactics. This is a proof of weapons network strategy to reset the world order. But these tariff rates and income is set to rise. And at the same time, we had the US Consumer Price Index inflation numbers this week, which showed that there is a reversal on the downtrend. Now, it's early doors, it still doesn't exclude the impact of tariffs, but the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, was slightly higher at 2.7%. I think expectations were 2.6%, and this is the first time in 5 months that they were higher than expectations. But it was a little bit confusing because the Producer Price Index, which is inflation for the products that are needed to build components, that was flat. And so that was slightly off as well. And so the impact of the big, beautiful bill, while it's hit the stock market, which is a leading indicator, it hasn't actually had its impact on inflation yet. And that's why Jerome Powell is basically saying we don't know what the impact of tariffs are, so I can't reduce rates. Until we know, we'll watch the data and we'll analyze the impact. This basically marks the beginning of a reversal in the disinflation trend. So it went from 9% to approximately a lower 2.4%, and now it's up to 2.7%, which means it didn't hit the 2% goal, and it looks like it's headed towards the 3% target now, which I think is going to be systemically built in, and we won't know the impact because we've got this artificial intelligence creating disinflation. We've got to figure out what the impact on productivity relative to all of this debt and this divide and civil unrest that's happening, and all of the Trump policies through this fiscal domination and excessive printing and rolling over the debt that is inflationary in nature, as well as resetting the world order into a multipolar world order. Do you understand why Bitcoin is so much simpler than trying to figure out all this stuff? But we will do mathematics and gymnastics every single week in order to try and help you get through this stuff. Whereas Bitcoin, the monetary policy, is known through proof of work anytime into the future because it's enforced by maths and code, and nobody can change it. You have to play around with it, and you just don't get any type of chance to change it. And that's why people are flocking to Bitcoin as well. So I think 3% consumer price index is now on the horizon. And I think we're moving into inflationary policies where they kind of take different things out of the index. But we're moving to inflation based upon Trump policy. So what did Trump do? He basically called out, and I quote, that the Fed, he called out the Fed. He said, cut rates by 3 points. That will save $1 trillion a year would be saved. He's right. It would save $1 trillion a year, but only on the short-term rates because the long-term rates will go up. So you're getting closer and closer to a debt-based Ponzi scheme that needs to be rolled over every month, and it's still going to be higher than the 3.3%. But if you cut by 300 basis points, which has never happened in history of the Federal Reserve, then you get to sell those bonds and you get to roll it up, probably back it by stable coins now that the Genius Act has passed, if you want to do that, and use some crazy types of tools. But essentially, this is rapidly moving to an acceleration of an inflationary environment as well. What does it mean in an inflationary environment? It means asset prices surge. What does that mean? Well, let's have a look at Japan as well. So we've done the European Union, the destabilization campaign, the vassalization that the proof of weapons network that I believe America is being used for its capital market, and its proof of weapons network portfolio companies, but the people don't matter anymore. And the only way to beat it is to own the assets. So what's happening in Japan right now? Remember, the Bank of Japan is a useful tool for the proof of weapons network, the Japan carry trade, in order to get free money to speculate on US stocks and various other assets. What's happening in Japan? Basically, treasury yields, just like in America, have basically silently surged to record highs. And so they're going up, with the 30-year yield on Japan debt has now hit 3.2% this week. Japan's 30-year government bonds have lost 45% of their value since 2019. So remember, as they lose value, that means any bank in distress who has to hold it to maturity can end up with a distressed bank situation, because you get to mature it, but as the price goes down, but you're compensating for a lower price by a higher yield. And, these are the types of things that can cause distress in foreign banks. Foreign banks that are connected to the American banking system, whether it's European Union or Japan, these types of trends can cause the types of distress. And so the Bank of Japan is basically got unrealized losses from this government bonds that hit a So what happens when you're trying to stimulate? You can only stimulate through debt in these situations. And now Japan's debt to GDP ratio has now exceeded 260% for the first time in history. That is the highest, in the world, 260% from a major economy. And their long-term rates to borrow are going up. So their debt to GDP ratio is roughly double what it is in the United States. And this is the same policy that Trump is following. It increases the amount of interest you have to pay as you go into an inflationary debt spiral. And ironically, the US is currently in a far more unsustainable position, because Japan at least has a major trade surplus. Now, Trump administration said through Doge they're going to move to a trade surplus, but that policy's gone. Big Beautiful Bill said, no, we're doing trade deficit. We're continuing on the same path. So although you got a trade surplus this month, we need to watch that, because it's a projected $1.88 trillion for this year. And so this is more unsustainable than the Japan situation. The Bank of Japan owns approximately 52% of all government bonds. So the Federal Reserve is going to be the one that owns those bonds for its shareholders, that has to pay a 6% dividends to the banksters that own the shares. And Japan's consumer price inflation is basically, excludes fresh food, has accelerated to basically 3.7% year on year in May. And so this is the fastest rate increase and inflation increase pace since January 2023. This is exactly what the Fed wants to avoid and what Trump wants to reverse. So Japan basically has a policy rate of 0.5%, even though we've got this, so it's pushing it down. It's pushing down those rates. And you have a debt to GDP ratio of over 250%. Germany basically has a policy rate of about 2.25%, which is 4.5 times higher than Japan, and a debt to GDP ratio of only 62%. So this is a quarter of what's happening in Japan. However, the 30-year government bonds in Germany and Japan, they both yield the same 3.1%. So this is just crazy economics in Japan through the destabilization campaign and vassalization of Europe. And also now Japan is moving closer to China as a result of everyone being pushed east through these tariff policies, which is meant to increase some of the revenue in America. So this is uncharted territory. We've never seen anything like this. Maybe you can compare it to the post-World War II manufacturing-based economy, where it was all built upon war. But that's when America had a manufacturing base. This is not really comparable. given the current percentage of the size of the economy relative to these deficits as well. So no politician wants to be the one to cut spending, despite the fact that there are rising runaway deficits. This is the trade deficit that is running away. Japan is basically just foreshadowing what could be next for many, many countries around the world as a result of these proof of weapons network, including the US. This could be the strategy because nothing adds up. There's nothing sustainable about it. And what is China doing in order to protect itself is basically loading up on oil. So while China, it looks like it's doing massive growth right now because it keeps buying more and more oil, is buying massive amounts of oil. It's buying that from China. Is using its own sources of alternative renewable sources to build its own supplies. It's buying it from Russia. It's buying it from Saudi Arabia. It's buying it from Iran. And China is the most important client of the GCC, of the BRICS nations, of the ASEAN nations as a result of these tariff policies. And it is loading up on the largest oil reserves in the world right now. That's kind of in preparation for needing to be self-sovereign, preparing for the eventuality that there may be some kind of war, which I know the proof of weapons network will look to make up for lost profits. We'll save that for the geopolitical section. In the geopolitical section, I'm only going to be covering the Epstein stuff and the Syria stuff as well. Next week, I think we'll cover more on the China side and the European side in terms of the proof of weapons network and the geopolitical escalations as a result of this new world order that's coming through, this multipolar world order. But China is essentially becoming more important than OPEC Plus is, and it could become more important in terms of if it wants to reduce the prices of oil. So it can now build autonomy and have an important flooding the supply or using the supply with its vast oil reserves at the same time as America's strategic petroleum reserve and Trump's drill baby drill goals are not being met. So there is a depletion of the reserves in America and an increase in the reserves. And what did we have in part one? There was a depletion of the Bitcoin strategic reserves as well. So at the same time as chips being made in Taiwan that are required for Nvidia and the largest market cap companies in America, at the same time as being able to control some of the oil markets, as well as the easing up. That's why these negotiations are happening. That's why Nvidia is able to sell chips to China right now, because there is a power struggle that has already been done, and it's also got the manufacturing base. So that's what is happening on the trade war side, and that's why you're seeing a loosening up of these different things, and this very, very changing time, which is what leads me to believe that geopolitically, that I cover in more in 3, why we're entering into a new phase rather than using the old model to analyze geopolitics of how things have always been. We're entering into a new phase because the military industrial complex needs to make up for lost profits that I believe are going to come out of the Middle East as a result of these negotiations that I'll be covering in part 3. And therefore, it needs to go deeper into the EU and Asia Pacific regions, because that's where the military industrial complex from the proof of weapons network, they have the vassalization of Japan, Philippines, Taiwan, European Union, so that they can just become tools for the military industrial complex, financial industrial complex, and technology industrial complex as the world resets around those. And so there's resistance against those, as we see, which is Russia, BRICS, China, Iran, and things that were covered in the BRICS summit last week. So the technology industrial complex is essentially looking to take some of the market from the financial industrial complex as a result of all the acts that we covered in part 1 in This Week in Bitcoin, Crypto, and CBDCs. And it's also, as AI becomes a tool for some of these battles and cybersecurity becomes a tool that's being weaponized, cybersecurity and artificial intelligence are basically drawing the military industrial complex into the technical industrial complex. And so we're having this asset management by the proof of weapons network based upon going all in on technology, and debt being backed by stable coins and these new tools and surveillance and civil unrest, domestically, as well as the tools that we use to destabilize regions in the Middle East. They're coming home. And that's why you're getting these campaigns that are happening within Europe, while you're getting countries like Japan stepping away from the carry trade and over to these vassalization trades, where BlackRock ends up, through trade policies, consolidating into the large corporations, and making up for these sources of profits for it. So then that brings me to the types of things that we're seeing that we're going to be covering in part 3, which is the Epstein files and their connection to the proof of weapons network. And so in this week in GeoPolitics, this is going to be everything we're going to cover in part 2 this week in macro. We're going to be covering the 2 stories of the Epstein files, Trump, Musk, and all of that network. We built upon it last week, and you can catch up on those videos from last week. Or you can go through, we're going to be doing 2 different stories in the geopolitical side, even though there's more I'd like to cover. There was a lot happening on the Russia-Ukraine side, and there was a lot happening on the China side. I'm going to save those for next week. But I want to build upon these 2 stories of how are the Syria escalation and the Epstein files, are they coming from the same proof of weapons network? And what does that mean that we need to analyze? And I'll be analyzing all of that in this week in GeoPolitics in part 3. So I hope you enjoyed this week in macro. I hope you enjoyed this week in Bitcoin, part 1 and part 2. In part 1, we covered the Clarity Act, the Genius Act, the Anti-CBDC Act, and where the Bitcoin strategic reserves of the US have gone from 200,000 to 28,000. In part 2, we covered what's happening in the EU destabilization campaign, the Japan campaign based upon these tariff policies, and what we can learn for the future of China becoming more like an OPEC oil country, and also US and its depletion, but its movement towards a technocracy as a result of some of these proof of weapons network plays and vassalization plays that we're seeing. So if you enjoyed that, then please do me a favor. If you're not a subscriber to my channel on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell symbol, hit all. We have now passed 100,000 subscribers, and the next goal is to eventually get to 21 million subscribers, 1 for every Bitcoin. But in that journey, we want to get to 210,000 subscribers as the next goal, so I can share this message with more people and help more people adjust and prepare, because this requires preparation for a world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies that we're moving towards. Now, YouTube is now going to do a bit of a review. And in case that review goes badly, follow me on X. I do all these streams over there, and I do lots of X spaces. You can come up and engage with me and ask me questions over there as well. In case that goes wrong, download this Bitcoin Hard Talk podcast on Apple or Spotify if you use Android device. Then you can watch parts of it and come back to it later as well, and do it with no extra time while you're in the gym or the car. Also, in case all that goes wrong, I back it up on what's it called? Doing a mind bog. The company that Tether invested in, the video streaming, Rumble. I do it over Rumble. I'm trying to build my follows there just in case everything goes wrong. And if you aren't a free member of the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal at Simon Dixon, then you can head over to simondixon.com, and that's where you can find all the blogs and all the updates and all the videos and all the AI summaries and all the different previous content, so that you can binge to protect yourself in this world of Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs. Put a comment below, share. I'm going to have a little bit of water. We've got a bit more for you. We're going to be doing part 3 this week in GeoPolitics, and we're going to be focusing on Syria and the Jeffrey Epstein files.